I can't prepare them to be okay. I cannot guarantee them a long life, but what I can guarantee them, or what I can prepare them for, is that in every decision, if they can just make it with love, even if that means, God forbid, something takes them out soon, that's all I can do, right? That is the only thing as a parent that I can give my kids is do it with love, right? Do it with love, do it with an understanding that we are all connected.
I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. This week on the Poetry of Predicament podcast, we welcome back Dr. Jillan Sackett. She's a very dear, longtime friend. She's also a loving and concerned mother, a loving and concerned and profoundly effective children's psychiatrist. She's also a person who I would call deeply committed to continual learning throughout life, how we might comport ourselves, how we might provide a more powerful and loving presence for the people we love in face of the most challenging time in human history. Please help me welcome Dr. Jillan Sackett. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I am your faithful host, Dean Walker, and it is January 26th in 2022. And I am just back from being down and offline for a few days, recovering from a minor surgery. I'm happy to report that I'm doing well. And it has been a really much needed break from the constant 24/7 tsunami of content and screens and working and so on. So I'm very flattered, not flattered. I'm very happy to be back, and I'm taking it one small step at a time to refill that dance card. I want to keep it as spacious as possible for as long as I can. So today, I am really pleased to have a guest from long ago, a number of years ago. I had my first interview with Dr. Jillan Sackett. She's a child psychiatrist in the Northeast of the USA. And we've had the pleasure of being in various courses and gatherings and Zoom meetings and so on in the context of this either the Living Resilience Deep Academy work or Safe Circle meetings and so on. And really, beyond being just a very, very dear friend at this point, I so look forward to every conversation with Jillan because two things. As you'll see, I'll put the link to the earlier interview for you so you can get a sense of before and after, if you will. What's been extraordinarily inspiring, and I've learned a huge amount from Jillan as she's shared at every step of the way. Jillan, you've got a tremendous ability to be extraordinarily articulate about your own process and what you are willing to share about your family's process as well. We'll hear about some of those stages, some of those transitions a bit today. And, these are not small steps that you've taken that I'm aware of. And so it's been really inspiring and informative. And the second thing, since in the same ballpark, is how you just appear to be so, this is not a professional term, but you seem to have a spidey sense for the deep troubles. I would call them shreds or tears in the fabric of our social reality. And you in mental health are in a prime spot to be able to see what's been going on in these troubled times. And we met, I'm guessing, about 5 years ago. I'm sorry, I don't remember. But the signal to noise ratio was different then, and the important existential challenges that we all now are very clear about, and they're a daily news item now, were 5 years ago less so. I don't know what the accurate amount is for most people. I think you and I were both very much aware of what was going on and what was coming back then, and that's really at the core of our knowing one another. So Jillan, I'm just happy that we got to be together and spend some time. Just if we could read books to each other over this call, and I'd be thrilled. But that we can compare notes about what these 5 years have been like, and I'm specifically curious about the grand scale that you've gone through changes with your family in these times. And then eventually, if we've got enough time at the end, I'd really love for us to cover some of the ground of the new mental health, especially youth mental health studies that have been coming out, articles that have been coming out far more frequently now than ever before. So I'd love to just get your sense of how things are going at scale. So thanks so much for coming on and spending time. And would you do me a favor and just introduce yourself a bit more? Anything you'd like to tell us about your practice or your, the professional side of you, and that you'd like to have us know, and perhaps a bit about what is the nature of your work? When what do you do in your week and so on, just so we can get a sense of kind of at what level of the mental health community you are active in and some of the issues you are facing. So, hi.
Hey, yeah, so thank you. And as always, it's like one of my favorite joys is to, even if it's not a real room, to be in a room with you.
Yeah.
I just want to, as you know, but maybe not everybody else. So I just want to start with some gratitude for you, and you're helping me through and on this journey and path. So yes, thank you. So in terms of the work question, that's also in transition. So right now I'm doing pretty typical psychiatry, med management, 2 days a week via Zoom, or not Zoom, iOS, but I do a lot of in that sort of trying to help people challenge the matrix a little bit. This isn't something's wrong with you. This is something wrong with society. Kind of a lot of trying to process with that for them and with them, because I work with a lot of moms, and I mean, this society is broken for a lot of people, but it's very broken for moms. The amount of work that gets put on and requested of moms, and then they feel like they can't say no, they can't do anything for themselves, they can't, so there's a lot of trying to undo that. But that's also another role of transition. So my life has been full of transition since we've talked the first time. So I think right around the first time we talked, my father had just passed, which in of itself is a, mark in someone's life. Clearly it was when I finally came to full accepting terms of our climate crisis, right? I'd always known, the core of me had always known, but I finally let it crack through. And then that put me in a tailspin, as you're well aware, of grief and despair and panic and all the nasty emotions that we don't like to deal with in this culture. But we can't move forward until we sit with those. And that's the other thing I try to talk to my patients about, because a lot of them want the nope, don't want to go there, give me a medicine. And I try to talk to them about like, nope, that's where we got to go. If the medicine's going to help you go there, great, let's do the medicine. But if the medicine's a band-aid to keep you from there and to keep you numb. So I went very dark and a lot of grief for a long time. And then my little brother overdosed. And so it got darker and more grief. And I fully believe it's all connected. He didn't overdose because he's a bad person. He overdosed because he's a very sensitive soul who couldn't handle what this world was doing to his soul. I mean, that's my, and I don't think it was intentional either, but I think that, yeah. So, and then we're very fortunate people, and we could up and move our lives. And we decided to move them to Vermont, where we thought that it would just match what we want for our children, more what we want for ourselves, more outdoors, more space, more trees, more connection to land. We did that. Yeah.
Can I just check in with you about, I get this transition, and I'm assuming that your spouse, your kids, and your work situation all were workable, at least, if not the spouse and kids being a yes for the transition. It was at least workable for everybody.
Right. Yeah.
Got it.
Well, my spouse has been a little unwillingly put on this journey with me, right? Because there's kind of been no other choice. Like every time I learned or held something dark, he sort of had to hold it too. Yeah, I mean, right. So to your question, yes, we're all, we're very lucky. He could get a job. My job is because of COVID, my job became movable. And my 12-year-old's a little bit more disgruntled because it's not the nicest thing to do to a 12-year-old to uproot them. But we also wanted to uproot him because we wanted to try to get him back to the land. The other two are young enough that they're, it's easy enough and they're happy. And the other transition that's happening is I'm learning psychedelic therapy is becoming, soon it will be legal federally. So I'm trying to learn how to provide that, because I believe that that's a great way to help people through to the other side of where we need to be through this transition.
If I could just put a little pin in this moment and this topic, we don't have the time to go in depth into that topic today. I hope I can lasso you into another conversation in the near future where we can really deep dive there. It's been something that's been pretty close to the front of my screen for decades, and way before the idea of it being legal anywhere. And I'm so curious how that's looking. It's clear that it's looking like a good track for you and for, nationally. So I'm just curious, and if we could do a deep dive at some point, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Could I ask one more kind of
sorry, I'm moving this around for a second. Yeah.
Okay. One more detail on what you were just covering, that's transition to a different state, different home, different schools for the kids, and so on. I'm curious if you could say, some folks that I interview, particularly in the take my hand, conscious parenting in a time of stolen dreams, which is a curated set of interviews and content that is kind of a sister podcast, if you will, to this one. I talk with parents who are pretty darn aware, like you and your family are, I would consider pretty darn aware. And some have a pretty rich inner resourcing, a way to do self-regulation, co-regulation. And for those who, I'm sorry, I don't like those clinical terms, but I don't know what's an easier way to describe it. It's really basically the idea that life these days is so turbulent. It's really prone to knocking us off center, off of that familiar, way that we would say, I'm doing okay over here. So my ability to return myself to that okay state, or that resilient state, that state where I have a little bit of sense of humor, a little bit of my wits about me, I can be present to the people around me and so on. And when we're hit by something that's a shock to our system, when we're knocked off center, which sometimes, be it climate change or an economic reality or a relationship reality, or, and God knows what scale of event could knock us off center, do we have the inner resources or the resources together to be able to bring ourselves back to center so we can be a bit more present in our relationship rather than just spun out and reactive? So thanks for sitting through that. I know I'm preaching to not just the choir, but the choir director here, but I just want people to know what that kind of odd term about self-regulation and co-regulation is. I'm curious if you have any kind of rituals or practices that you do to just keep yourselves a bit more connected, a bit more sane.
100%. And that, yes. So let me, yes, I want to get to that, but I also want to start with where you kind of actually started this with that deregulation. So I needed to be deregulated. I needed to be knocked off center. And that's right. That the climate that my little brother, I was there, those were deregulating, that the walls tumbling, crucible moments. And for me, it took me those fierce shockwaves to learn how to re-regulate, and to learn how to really listen to myself and to really learn how to recenter. Before all of those, or before those, I didn't know how to listen to my intuition. I could hear it, but I would ignore it because it was often going against the cultural norm. And listening to my intuition is a really good way, or listening to one's intuition is a really good way to, restabilize and recenter. I have a bunch of practices at this point that are my core. So I wake up before everybody and I do some yoga, and none of it's long. I do like a 10-minute yoga routine. I say a few prayers. One is the Moda Ani, which is a Jewish prayer, and it's basically thanking whatever power you want to, a nurturing presence, Gaia, however you want to define your word, the oneness. It's thanking it for returning your soul to you. And it's my favorite line of it is you have, like, how great is your faith in me, right? So and that recenters me, because it's not just about me trying to find whatever spirit's there, but the reciprocal relationship of it's also trying to find me, like that I have a presence and a matter. And then I have my own little prayers I say. I have to the land here, to the Abenaki land. And then I meditate for about 15, if I'm lucky, 20 minutes. And then I have to start my routine of getting everybody awake. And then I try to also go into the woods every day and listen to the trees and talk to the trees and learn from the trees. For me, that's very centering.
Is there anything that you do as a family or in any combination of y'all when there's kind of a bump in the road in relationship or kind of a tough spot where somebody's feeling a lot and can't quite untangle it for themselves? Any way that you come together in all of you or in any sort of number of you to help each other connect?
I mean, my kids, it's a little bit of they don't want to hear it from me too much, you know?
Yes.
My daughter, she likes to fall asleep to like a sleep meditation every night. So I think that helps her. And she will, if she's getting upset, I can say to her, do some deep breaths, and she will.
Yeah.
My sons don't want that from me. My oldest one will let me come back to whatever situation that was heated and we can talk about it. And my little one, he's just a mover. He has to, whatever emotion he's having, it has to be moved.
Yeah.
Physically.
Yeah. Very clear. Well, thank you. I don't mean to, drill down on your family practices, but it's so informative, and I so appreciate you sharing about your own and the other, that your various groupings of your family share. And so if there's more you'd like to share about any of that, please feel free. And then I actually took you off track where you were starting to really take us through some of the additional steps, transitions that you've intentionally gone through yourself. So really, I'd say the floor is yours, whatever thread feels most alive for you.
Yeah, let me try this. I have no more hope than I had before 5 years ago. Right. I'm not like all of a sudden fooled. And I think this is where you and I, when we go into some of these groups, we don't feel good because they're still selling false hope. Right. I don't, right. And I am not, I have no more false hope than I had before. What I have now is the regulation skills, right? The coming back to present. And gratitude. Although you know me well enough to know that that's never been a hard thing for me, gratitude. But and what happened in the shattering really of the shattering of my life in some ways, especially when my little brother died, was a necessary undoing. I started to really see, like, not just kind of like feel and could sense that there was something icky and wrong. I could really see how broken our culture is and has been. The colonizer mindset, the rape, enslave, destroy, capture, take human and all life.
Yes. And
how brainwashed we are since inception. We are just brainwashed into the scarcity stuff, this take because you might not have tomorrow, and so don't lend, don't share. And this idea that privilege is somehow like I've earned my privilege, right? I haven't earned my privilege. I've just been very lucky. And what that's done in shattering that is that it's allowed me to see what life could be. And that doesn't mean I have hope that it will be, but seeing how beautiful life, like almost like, like Charles
Eisenstein.
Eisenstein's name. I only blank on it in here. I've said it like 4 times today. If I recall from our first interview, I talked about how much that term, the
more beautiful world our hearts know is possible.
Right. How much I hated that term. And I hate it because I hate the idea of the false hope it gives off. But I also love it now because I understand how important that is for our hearts to know that the way we're living doesn't have to be this way. It is this way, but it doesn't have to be. And for the longest time, most of my life, I really thought humans were a cancer on this world. Most of my life. And I thought it would be better if we were gone. All of us just boom, vanished. And the world can heal and life can go on and Gaia can be. And through learning more about Native cultures from all over the world and really like opening myself to them, and through the practices with Naomi and Deborah from the Becoming Gaia, and through listening to Louise LeBron, and through you, and through all these readings I've been doing, I've come to finally realize, and by the way, all these readings, one of them in particular I want to mention is Braiding Sweetgrass, which I know, I mean, that we're not this, we don't have to be a plague. We don't have to be a cancer. That we lived for so many thousands of years, that's what, which is washed away in our history books, right? As like one page of history, and still it's told in this savage type, quality. We lived for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of thousands of years in harmony with this knowledge of how to relate to the land and how to love the land and how to have the land love you back. And we didn't need all this other stuff. We didn't need science, to prove anything. We knew how to live, and we weren't a cancer. We were like, in fact, through Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, right? It turns out that the forests where they kill the black ash trees for the baskets, right? Those are the healthier forests. And so on, that's one example. But we actually are part of this integral system. And when we're healthy and in right relationship, we're a welcomed, loved, wanted member of this world. And for me, the learning of that and the ingestion of that has been almost everything, because it's not that I have now this false hope that life's going to be okay. I really don't. But I still know that even if it's fictional, it's still possible. Does that make, or not possible? It's like, or that it's, even though it's not possible, it's not fiction. I guess maybe it's almost the opposite of what I started to say. That even though I don't have good hope for us, the fact that there's a reality where we could be living that way, it helps to repair like the brokenness and the despair.
If you don't mind, I'd like to just pause again to make a bit of a clarification, so folks who are watching might not be aware of some of these names you're putting out. Certainly the book, I'll be putting the names of each of these sources that you're talking about. The books are easiest of all to follow. You can just go to your favorite bookstore and get the book, and those notes will be there. But some of the bodies of work that you're talking about are what I might call on the transformative end I've adapted the Paul Chafurka scale that you and I might have talked about over these years, from his 5 steps, 5 stages of awareness, from dead asleep in his terms, all the way up to the realization that we are in a predicament, a human caused predicament, and so on. I've broken it down to 3 stages of engagement in the collapse aware conversation. And I would call those 3 levels up from business as usual, where people just aren't, they don't think about self-regulation and co-regulation, and really don't have in mind this kind of deep exploration of how might we return to a felt sense of being integral to the web of life that you're describing. So they're in the business as usual starting point, which is most of the world from now till the end of time, there's no engagement with any of these resilience skills, any of these attempts to reconnect with the web of life and so on. They just don't happen there. The first level of these 3, this now 3-part steps of stages of awareness, as Paul Chafurka would call it, and I would call it engagement, ability to activate a sense of resilience at each of these levels that's appropriate to the level. So the first level is, I would call first aid level resilience. And that's if you and I live in Houston and Hurricane Harvey comes through. And so we find ourselves, our entire neighborhood is washed out, flooded, completely unlivable. And we're all 50 families are in the high school gym in the area. And we're all huddled together wondering, what the hell are we going to do with this? And that's what Mike Tyson, the mental health expert Mike Tyson, might call, he says, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. Mm-hmm. Something like that hurricane, different for different parts of the world, obviously, is our punch in the face, so to speak. And what that level of resilience skills is truly at the base level of, how do I breathe? How do I sit in stillness? How do I touch, literally put pressure on parts of my body to just bring my attention and my awareness and my presence back into my body? Because again, I know I'm speaking to someone who's quite expert at this, and I'm speaking to folks who might not be aware of these distinctions. This level of resilience skills is the most basic possible. Like, how can I stop from just checking out? Like, it's completely overwhelming my system. If my house is no longer functioning, all of our cars are decimated, and so on and so on. The list goes on. And so what many of us will do, without even thinking about it, is we'll check out. We will literally leave our body. We won't be present to our body. We won't be present to the most important relationships in our lives. I can be standing with my family all around me, and at that level of stress, it's quite possible I will not be present at all. So at that first aid level of resilience skills, it's just those very basic skills that I went and paid a bunch of money, and I love the folks at the Trauma Resource Institute down in Southern California. I love their work. Elaine Miller-Karras and her team are the kind of folks that go out and train people in those kind of settings, in mass shooting situations and other really large scale disaster events, in how to bring themselves back to some kind of presence. Not even necessarily center, it's just getting back in your body so you can be functional at a basic level and start to be at least a small amount of being of service to the people you love. You've got to somehow pull it together. So the second level is practices of reconnection. And there's this is a big part of this body of work, kind of It's ripened a bit since you and I have last talked. It's hopefully clearer and more concise and more accessible for people. And I'll be putting links to, the basic course elements that people might want to find out more about this. But the practices of reconnection is right at the center of this model. And it's basically, if I have any amount of my wits together, and if I can see there are ways for me to be more and more present in the face of larger and larger stressors, and that your practices of reconnection will probably be different than mine. But the gift of this work and how we've got it structured is that we can sit in circle together, and you can support me in my practices and I can support you in yours, even though they're different. So there's a lot more to say about practices of reconnection, but I think you get the idea. I'm laying this out for folks who are hearing this newly, because this is, I've been really checking out the marketplace of ideas here. And other than the community resilience model of Elaine Miller Karras that I was talking about in the first aid level, there's really not much in the way of training and development for people to be able to do just that, to expand their ability to be present in the face of larger and larger stressors. So you get the idea. That's that whole practices of reconnection that actually includes things like that lovely Braiding Sweetgrass book would be a wonderful element within that set of practices. Thank you for sitting through this, Jillan. I appreciate it. I'm about to get to the last piece, and I want to loop it back to what you were sharing about a couple of bodies of work that you've been engaged in these years of transition and development of your own self, shifting of your family. And so those bodies of work, which again, I'll note in the show notes, these are in the third and final element in this stages scale that I'll be putting up on the screen here in this video. The third and final element is, I call the transformative. So what happens is people take on sincerely more and more of these practices of reconnection. What I find is that, and certainly was my experience in my practices, which are still very active today, and I've had a very full set of life development practices since I was a teenager. And what I've seen time and time again for people from all walks of life is the more we sincerely take on those practices of reconnection, we start to bump into this realm called the transformative. And that's where the wisdom traditions for thousands of years, people have committed their lives. The joke is they're sitting on a mountaintop somewhere. Well, it's an extraordinary, that history of those wisdom traditions, those sadhus, those folks who have committed their lives to a contemplative practice and so on. What they're nudging toward is truly the transformative. It is like a unity experience, a satori experience, a nirvana experience, and so on. But as Andrew Harvey, who is a remarkable mystic and sacred activist in his own right, tells us quite passionately, you might want to, I'll include a couple of links for him as well in the show notes. He is very helpful in exploring and articulating, this is tough work. So the kind of work that Jillan's talking about is a kind of inner exploration that is not necessarily painful, and it's not even necessarily as dark or as difficult as some shadow work can be, but it always involves letting go. And letting go at deeper and deeper levels of pieces that we've grown up with, being saturated with in our culture. And those are the ones that you've been describing that are kind of come to us like, oh God, I can't believe I'm up to my earlobes in this really destructive thing, this part of our culture. So that's where these bodies of work, that Joan's talking about and the practices that she's talking about that are kind of at the advanced level that you've been sort of pointing toward. Thank you so much again for sitting through all this. I feel badly, but I really wanted to put this in context because I've looked long and hard, and I don't find this in even the most robust mental health facilities environment or resources environment for average people like you and me. I say we got to have the best tools we can possibly have to choose and have a path we can out ahead of us to give us some sense making in this insane world. So I just want to acknowledge you've been on that path and you've been forging that path. And you, as far as I'm concerned, are clearly adept at getting into that transformative zone. And it's clear that you, if you're anything like me, you're always going to have practices of reconnection to return to. And again, like all of us, we all need to know how to do those first aid level resilience skills, because life's going to still have its way with us every day for the rest of our lives. So again, thank you for your patience. Does that spark you to share in any direction? You please take it from here.
So many, but I feel like I keep being like, oh, I want to say it, but I can't remember, other than I guess just a couple of follow-ups. One is, yeah, it's hard, right? It's so much easier if I could just abort this whole ship and go back to being numb, and not that I was numb, but go back to, pretending, go back to pretending. But this is so much better, right? To be in truth and to not hide and run. I mean, I tell my family and my patients all the time that if there's something that you're running from, if you don't turn around and face it, you're going to be running from it until the day you die, right? It never stops chasing you. Oh, Tecopah Turner, Belonging. That's another good book. Sorry, just that popped into my head. And I forget what else I was going to say to that, so I guess I'll just let it go. And the only other thing I guess to say is, as hard as, first place, I have all these amazing guides in my life, of which I'm very fortunate for, and of which I've also realized that I have helped to cultivate this, right? This is because I wasn't going to let you go, right? For example, right? Once I had, so whereas I also give gratitude for all of you, I'm also grateful to myself for knowing who to hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been really, really, it's not easy. This is hard. And yet what other choice is there for anyone?
If you don't mind,
The light.
I don't want to put too much of a point on it, but the simple question you just said, it shows up for me just about every day because of, I'm introducing this work to people who don't know about it and so on. And I've been looking ever since writing my book, The Impossible Conversation, I've been looking for the simplest possible questions to motivate myself so I can stay at a very basic level and not get too heady about it and too complex about it. So if not despair and insanity, literally our world is insane. So
Insane.
if not a sense of despair and a complete lack of agency and insanity, then what? It really boils down to that. I heard that in the question you just asked.
Right.
And these bodies of work, these core elements that can nudge us, with which we can expand our capacity to be present in the face of larger and larger stressors. This is no small deal. This is extraordinary work that you're describing having done over a number of years now choosing remarkable mentors, remarkable course leaders, and so on, authors, to inspire you into the next level of expansion and expansion of capacity.
And I have to say, like, part of it's because, right, my world fell apart both ways. And part of it's because the truth is that it was always falling apart, right? I was born into this broken, we were all born into this broken, just culture. I think so much of my anxiety was trying to hold onto that broken culture. And that when I let it go and everything kind of just crumbled, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's so hard. It's also like by not trying to hold on to something that's so, by letting go of something so broken, it freed me up to finally hear my voice and to finally hear Gaia even. But it's hard. It's the same thing you're saying, right? Every day there's a part of me that just wants to like turn it off and, watch Netflix and not saying, I mean, listen, we all need to have those things too, but what I don't have a choice. I'm going to keep growing. That's who I am. I'm going to grow till the day that, whatever power decides I am no longer part of this body. And on that note, my faith varies too, right? Like I was born in a very non-faith family. I was told from an early age not to believe in anything. Science. I was told in a very early age to believe in science. And that took a lot of undoing because I always had this sense of there's more than that. There's I still struggle with that because my ego still comes in and tries to knock it down. And I hear my father, who's a beautiful person, but God was like a 4-letter word kind of idea, right? Like, but that little person in me knew there was more. That was a little person who would stare at the stars and just know that like this is bigger than me. And in this breaking down, that person has also been able to be freed. So it's not that I don't still struggle with it, because when you're raised in a very science rigid with, knowledge, but when my ego relaxes and lets me be the fool, then I can feel it. And I know there's something just greater than us. And that's a large part of this too, right? Is that I don't have very much hope that my children's lives are going to be at all like mine, nor do I want them to be, right? That they're on their own path. And as much as you and I had comfortable lives, potential, theoretically, they were also kind of just one big lie after another, right? Like, oh, USA human, whatever, the white colonists, yay, we're the best. How could anyone not want to be like us, right?
Yes.
I know that the last time we talked, and many times since then that we've talked, I've expressed to you my anxieties for my children, right? I can handle my own fate. And part of that is because of, my all of this growth. And part of it's just because I'm 45 years old. If it's my time to go, I've had 45 years. My children, it's a lot worse. And what I've realized in this awakening is that I can't keep them from getting injured if they climb on a tree. I can't keep them from getting hurt. I can't keep them from all the stuff that's coming their way. COVID is, as you and I both know, is just one string of all the stuff that's going to come, all the different hurricanes and storms that are going to come for them. This one's COVID. The next one will come. It's probably going to be worse. And, things are just going to keep coming, because right now Gaia is unstable, because she should be unstable. she is on, she is trying to send us messages. She is trying to awaken us. This is not Gaia just being like la da da. She is trying to wake us up. And what I realized is I don't have survival skills. I can't prepare my kids to survive necessarily. I can't prepare them to be okay. I cannot guarantee them a long life, but what I can guarantee them, or what I can prepare them for, is that in every decision, if they can just make it with love, even if that means, God forbid, something takes them out soon, that's all I can do, right? That is the only thing as a parent that I can give my kids is do it with love, right? Do it with love, do it with an understanding that we are all connected. And that's it. That's the only, and that's the other thing I've come to realize. And as hard as that is, it's also been such a joy and release too, because it's like, no, I can't protect them. And that anxiety is never going to go away. I'm always going to want to protect them. But I can at least establish in them a sense of, if you don't know what to do, ask your heart. Right. And if that means you're bleeding out on a field somewhere and you have an opportunity to do something horrible to someone else, or an opportunity to not, you get my point. Just, and that's the most I can do for them. And that I can do.
Right. Can I just pause you there? Because I think you're saying it really beautifully. And again, it's just one of these pauses where I'd like to just give, and this one will be shorter, of where this comes from my understanding. What I'm hearing you say is seems to be a part of these bodies of work that you've been engaged with for a few years. And a big part of that, from what I've been, folks have been shared, why I'm saying it this way is that it's mostly women's work. But I've had this lovely introduction from a number of the women involved in this lineage to the body of work. And one thing I've heard them share time and time again is how to find one's own core, how to find my own core. What is my truth in this body, in this moment, in this life? And can I have access to that? Can I create a channel through which I can most easily access that truth, rather than the swirl of insanity that we were talking about before, that is the world we're in? So it's quite a skill set to be able, that you're talking about giving bestowing onto your children, that you've been working on so diligently. So that a part of that skill set I'm hearing you describe and wanting to give to your children is the ability to find their truth in the moment. And that may sound extraordinarily simple. Most people, I think they know what this is, but my sense is the vast majority of us don't know what we don't know about what you're saying. This is actually an extraordinary gift, and a part, again, of those wisdom traditions of thousands and thousands of years, that it has taken a person an entire lifetime to forge that access to their truth, to their psychospiritual root in the moment that I hear you describing. So just wanted to put it in context for people. Thank you. And I hope that didn't take you off track.
No, thank you. No. And just right. So that's what I've come to realize, is I can raise children who can love, because I love. My heart has never, it's just, I am very fortunate that way. And and that's also the other thing I just want to get to is I'm still on my hero's journey, trying to figure out what my hero's journey is, right? What can I give back into this world and not just take? So I think that's part of it, right? I can give love, I can give kindness, I can And I'll tell you, one of my things I do every day, well, when I can, like I can't do it every day, but most days I have a tree that I hug. And I know it sounds wacky, but it's me giving the tree love and the tree giving me love. And
Yeah.
it's restorative. And
Yes.
there's times when I'm trying to center myself and I'm not near that tree, and just me visualizing giving that tree a hug restores me to my center.
Yes.
But so I know I can give love out into the world, and I know that can be part of my hero's calling, but I also know that I'm still waiting patiently for the rest of that calling. I know it has to do something with restoring the land. Maybe not me doing it, but me allowing maybe natives, indigenous doing it. I don't know, but something where there's the right relationship, because for the most part, we haven't been raised in right relationship with the land.
Absolutely.
And yet then there's the day-to-day, right? Day-to-day, we're so busy and things get so easy. I mean, I get through my day. So again, so back to that mode, Ani, the reason I love that is the centering of the faith that the powers have in me, right? Like, so therefore I'm here for a reason kind of idea. So that comes back to the hero's journey, right? So what is that, right? And again, I know there's the love, and I can give love, and I can teach love, but I'm still trying to figure that part out for sure.
May I shift gears with us? I know our window of time together is kind of slowly but surely coming to a close, and I wonder if we could shift our focus to some of the recent studies and articles and focus for some small portion of the mental health community, particularly on young people's mental health. Would that be okay to
it's great.
Shift a bit? And
I'm
I'd like to
about my connection. Yeah.
I'd very much like to keep a number of the elements we've been talking about present while we're talking about these elements, because I'm extraordinarily ambivalent here, and I hope people will understand. I'm going to say some kind of strong words here, some opinionated and kind of angry words, and I mean to bring them in balance, just to give you the full scoop, to full disclosure of what's going on inside of me. It's not just all rainbows and butterflies about how great it is that we're moving forward with mental health of any kind, but particularly for young people at this time. I mentioned at the beginning, and I guess just say a little bit more about the largest study that I'm aware of in recent times is I believe it was last October, that Caroline Hickman from the UK, a psychologist and one of the founders of the Climate Psychology Alliance in the UK, which is, I believe, one of the most active chapters of that kind of organization in the world. They put together a survey of more than 10,000 young people in a number of different countries, from the Philippines to the US and UK and elsewhere. And I'm sorry, I don't know other country names to say. And out of these more than 10,000 survey respondents, the core message was that there's a tremendous amount of anxiety and depression, a tremendous amount of suicidal ideation, and probably the most striking truth that got told through these survey responses was what I would call the shredding of trust with young people and adults that they rely on to maintain the world that they were born into, that these young people were born into. And that's the best word I can use to summarize. And I'll be putting the link in the show notes for one of the most gorgeous reports of, summary reports of a study that I've ever seen. A number of women of color, just were so articulate and so very able to set context for the viewer to be able to understand these issues and understand, make sense of some of the respondents, as they put together the responses into statistical and you know, making some kind of a cohesive statement, and they do just a gorgeous job of it. So again, that will be in the show notes. I'm curious, really, I don't think we have time for much, but I'm curious. A number of times you have leaned toward, what I was hearing was, you were saying something along the lines in between the words that you were saying, that it is a very healthy reaction to feel a sense of depression or anxiety or some trouble, a sense of being troubled in these times, that this is not the place to medicate. This is not the place to counsel so that this person, young person's psychological imbalance could be brought back to balance. This, in fact, is something of an expression of a healthy system, a healthy body, a healthy life, reacting quite appropriately to these desperate signals from the both the human systems and the earth systems around us. Caroline Hickman, I would say, you know, given I've listened to just about everything on the YouTube that she's put out, is saying very similar things. So I'm curious if you would like to say anything more about that track.
So yeah, so it's a both and here, because on the one hand, we don't want to medicate this. We don't want to treat it as something wrong with the child. It's not, right? On the one hand, it's very much the child responding appropriately to a horrible situation. And what they need is a support system that can hear them. So, you know, people like you know, these adults in their lives that hear them, validate them, and then can help them through. The flip side is, if they don't have those supports, because don't forget, most adults are still stuck in the same world, and more stuck in it because they have more stake in it. If they don't have those supports, then I do think medication has to have a role. Because if I let that kid tumble alone and don't give them anything, I mean, I might as well to give them a knife.
Right.
So I really hate part of my job, because I really hate medicating a person for a systemic problem. I hate it. And yet I recognize sometimes that if I don't, I risk losing this person, because for now they don't have the system, the support system they need to go through the transition that I just went through.
Yeah.
And I did it as an adult, and it was still hard as rocks, or whatever that expression is, right?
Yeah.
So as a teen or a child, oh my God, and you have no supports, it's just, it's becomes a little bit of an unfathomable. That being said, right, in an ideal world, absolutely, these kids should be angry, they should be sad, every quote unquote dark, bad feeling, right? Which of course, Louise is the first to say there are no bad feelings, right? But every one of those harder feelings, they have earned those. And what they need is for us to hear them, and for us to not try to fix them. And that's actually, that's another thing I'm trying to work on. Like, how do I get to those, you know, how can I be a support for those kids?
Right. May I just put in a couple of terms to just widen it just a little bit? And I'd love to hear your reaction to my adding them. Is it appropriate? Are these terms, do they have a place in this conversation? One comes from this is where I get grumpy. My experience is that we've got a global culture. The adults, the people above 18 years old around the world who are supposedly adults, there is a ubiquitous atmosphere of gaslighting. Anyone who is aware of what we're talking about, whether they're a child or an adult, we will be gaslit. We will be rejected at some level or another of the conversation. And so the lies and gaslighting on the one hand, so I consider that that's the pathology. Those are the people the adults who are delivering that and smearing it on from Greta Thunberg on down, that's where the pathology is. And I notice that there's nothing in the DSM-12 or whatever it is now that talks about that being a pathology that needs treatment, that needs to be articulated and treated, and so on, not to mention people put in jail, but that's further on my angry rant for another time. The other term, so in addition to the lies or gaslighting, in order to suppress the expression of these young people in particular and their truth and their true experience of what's going on, there's also the word trauma keeps coming up across the board time after time after time at different levels of this conversation. That what I would assert is we are in a constant 24/7 trauma delivery system. And so there may or may not be negative emotions. Okay, I can get the context shift and kind of an empowering context shift, but I don't know how trauma gets contextualized in a non-negative way. That's a lesson I need to learn or something. Right now, I hold it that's unacceptable. It is true, where the other one I was talking about, we need DSM, we need psychological and mental health criteria to be able to treat people, diagnose and treat people who are pathological with regard to how they're treating other people and the planet. That's that whole conversation. Similarly, there are many elements of trauma, again, at every level, from the physical and obvious, the traditionally described traumas, from physical trauma, we're in a car accident and so on, or we're beaten up by people on the corner and so on. But there's so many other levels of trauma that we're now in, both systemically around the world and on an individual basis, where young people are traumatized that they are not able to access their truth. Their truth is completely rejected, and it's in some cases, beaten or oppressed or suppressed out of them. So enough of my rant. I apologize for getting so far in that direction of it. I'm curious if those terms spark you to say anything. And then this will be our last little chapter here.
I would say we are in a culture of trauma, right? If we could name our culture, trauma, right? From, every aspect of our culture is traumatic, from our capitalistic system to our colonization to why we even colonized, right? We left because we were being traumatized in another place, most of us, right? In some form of trauma. Our culture is traumatic, and now it's a globally traumatic culture. And now you have news feeds, feeding into into the children all the time. You've got the social media traumas of you were left out, and I know that trauma might not be the right word, but for a teen, that's, you've got school traumas, you've got the shootings, you've got COVID, the parents threatening to shoot up the school because you have to wear a mask, or you've got, so these kids are bathing in trauma since they're little. And you've got all of our family traumas, right? We've got the epigenetics of all the historical family traumas in our lines. And that's all these kids know on some level is trauma, 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 trauma. And then you're right. And then as adults come along and say, oh, but you're resilient.
Yeah.
Right. Resilience is beautiful. Don't get me wrong. Resilience is key, but no one can be that resilient, especially alone. And unfortunately, our teens and kids are more and more and more alone, partly because of COVID and partly because of technology. And so they're handling trauma alone, which, as you know from your life work, you can't handle trauma alone.
Right.
And then you have the APA, the American Psychiatry Association, saying our suicide rates in teens are rising. We can't figure out why. I couldn't figure out, I don't know why they're not higher in some respects, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if these kids are, and we're telling them, and you have no future. We're stealing all of it from you. Because we're so addicted. And I'm equally addicted. We're so addicted that we're not going to leave anything for you. Yeah. So I don't know how, I don't know how the kids are doing it. The one thing I can say is I love these kids that are questioning the norms.
Yes.
Right. There's people, in our generation that are giving them a hard time for all these like gender bending things. And thank God for those kids that are questioning these norms, because all of our norms need to be questioned, and it starts with one and then it ricochets and it rolls to another. And without them doing that for each other, that is how they're hopefully going to somewhat heal some of their trauma, is by questioning these norms, because there's nothing normal about our norms, as you know, and as they know. And what happens is teenagers know all of this, and this is repetitive. This is all teenagers, right? We go through that rebellious teenager stage, right? But that rebellious teenager stage is not supposed to be smushed, and that's what we do in this culture, is we just knock it out of you. All right, you're over that. That was your stage. Come back to being like a cog in the wheel, because that's how we need you. And stop. Mm-hmm. And what we need is for them to have that rebellious stage and to find their rebellion, right? And to light a fire under that, right? And say, this is yours, but let's run with it. And that's not what we're doing, to your point, right? We're gaslighting still.
Yeah.
And when I, just to reflect back for a second, when I was a little kid, my thing was climate and was animals, and it was smushed. I had to care deeply about all of that. And I was told I was too sensitive, and I was too pessimistic, and all these things. And
yeah. So I'd like to just take a moment here to pause. It's something I'm kind of renowned for one reason or another. I find it's very valuable to pause. We've been on an extraordinary conversation, kind of a journey together. We've covered a lot of extraordinary and positive and really beautiful territory, and some really challenging and evocative and hard for me. Some of this territory is pretty hard. So I'm just wanting to take a breath and ask both of us and also the viewers to just take a moment to find that sense of center that we've been talking about in ourselves. There's in my experience, even in the hardest time of experiencing a difficult truth inside myself, and just breathing with it and just being present with it, there are always a number of other elements present. What I'm present to right this moment, as I'm noticing just little waves coming through of different impressions on my system and my heart. And I'm right now, I'm experiencing a wave of how much love you do bring to your work. you were talking about how that's probably your greatest inner resource, that you were just born with that ability to love at an extraordinary scale. And I would absolutely validate that. And I'm also getting a sense of how much you bring that to your work and your seeing and being with the world. And so I just wanted to articulate that, wanted to say that, wanted to name it. There's a way that these difficult topics and these difficult emotions and us sharing them is, for me, life-giving. There's a way in which telling these truths in this atmosphere of love and sharing is one of the most healthy things I can do in my own practices. So I'm really wanting to thank you for being so adept at covering this ground. This is tough ground, and if we bring this amount of love to it, it's sacred ground. So I just wanted to thank you for our time together and our conversation, for you sharing your story of your transitions of yourself and your family, and also disclosing a little bit about your own practices and your own resources, that love. I guess I'm closing up the space, and I want to give you a chance to say whatever you'd like to say to close up for yourself. And, I of course, didn't know where we would go today, really. And it's just been so nourishing. There's something so refreshing about being able to speak these truths and to share about our lives together. And it kind of reminds me of being able to sit around a kitchen table and to share all the pleasant stuff and also all the challenging stuff.
Mhm.
So is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up our time?
Yeah, if I could. One is, again, just deep gratitude for you. And I just, I don't know where I'd be if I didn't find you. So so yeah, I'm just, yeah. The other is, for as hard as all of this is, right? It's so hard, right? We are in a hard time in this world, in this universe, in this, we're in a hard transition. We are in an apocalypse in the traditional sense of it. But you know what? Looking away doesn't make it easier. It makes it harder.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what a lot of people are doing. They're looking away because they think it makes it easier. And I understand it, but it doesn't. And if I can just get one person to turn towards it.
Mm-hmm.
Two is, part of me is so grateful to be here right now in this hard apocalyptic time, because it also otherwise I would have been a drone also, potentially, for the whole of my life. And instead I get this opportunity to wake up. And I think that's really what Gaia wants. She wants us to wake up. And that doesn't mean that we have any hope of staying on the ride, but she's trying to wake us back up. We've been asleep for so long, and I'm so grateful that I get to. I don't have to be asleep anymore. And it's hard, but it's also the most beautiful thing. Yeah.
Jillan Sackett, Dr. Sackett, it is always a joy to speak with you. And this time, I'm just finding myself being moved at a whole different level being with you. It's so nourishing for me to hear about all these ways in which you've been transitioning and growing, and bringing your family along with you. And, it's just good to get some encouraging news from some direction. And I just want to acknowledge again, one last time, your immense heart that you're bringing to your own family and your work and to us today. You are a gift. Thank you very much for spending time.
Thank you, Dean. I really appreciate it, and you.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.